Muy buenos días con todos y
Good
bienvenidos.
morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, A Roadmap for Digital Transformation in Latin American and Caribbean Financial Cooperatives. I'm Gabriel Moira, Financial Intermediary Investment Officer at IDB Invest. I would like to share a few announcements before we get started. We have approximately 120 participants in our event. Thank you all for your participation. All microphones and cameras will be turned off during the session. English interpretation is available by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. We have set aside some time at the end for audience questions, so please submit your questions using the chat option, indicating to whom the question is directed. This session is being recorded. I would also like to invite you to download the publication, Digital Capacity and Financial Cooperatives in Latin America and the Caribbean. You can find the link in the chat. I would now like to welcome Maricela Alvarenga, head of the Financial Intermediaries section at IDB Invest, for her welcoming remarks. Please go ahead. Thank you very much, Gabi. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of IDB Invest, I would like to thank all of those of you who have connected from different parts of Latin America and the Caribbean. As many know, IDB Invest is the IDB Group's private sector arm. Our mission is to support the private sector and to support growth of our partners through projects that have a significant impact and that contribute to sustainable development in the region. We are facing a major challenge and to rebuild our economies better and make them more sustainable. The pandemic took us all by surprise. No one can deny that. According to LAC, the social impact of the pandemic has been particularly difficult for 40% of workers who lack access to any form of assistance or social protection mechanism. The same is true for micro and small businesses. It's been very difficult. Approximately 2.7 million businesses in the region could close, mostly micro enterprises, and this could result in the loss of 8.5 million jobs. And it is precisely here that digital transformation has taken on unprecedented importance. It's stimulating new methods of consumption, fueling business innovation, transforming production systems and value chains, reorganizing economic sectors, and introducing new conditions for competitiveness. While there are differences between commercial banks and financial cooperatives, digital transformation aimed at customers and processes has been recognized as one of the fundamental pillars for ensuring relevance in financial markets. In spite of this, however, there is a growing gap between the two types of financial institutions, which could create threats that must be mitigated, or it could create opportunities we can seize. I would invite you and financial intermediaries to focus on those communities that are underfinanced or excluded, including low-income urban populations, rural communities, women, indigenous populations, and MSMEs. I would like to extend special thanks to our panelists today who will share their experiences and lessons learned in the context of the digital transformation processes that their financial intermediary institutions have experienced. And thank you also to IDB Invest Financial Inclusion Team. With the collaboration of Sparkasse Alemana, Latin America, and the Caribbean, we have compiled these experiences in the publication Digital Capacity and Financial Cooperatives in Latin America and the Caribbean. We invite you to download the publication, and we will include the link in the chat to make that easier for you. Once again, thank you all. I hope this panel will be a great learning experience for everyone who's joining us today, and that together we can continue to invest in the economic and social and inclusive development of Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maricela. I would now like to give the floor to Roberto Salas. senior consultant of Sparkassen Finance Group, who will talk to us about the findings and lessons learned from financial cooperatives in their digital transformation processes. Please go ahead, Roberto. Thank you. Thank you to every one of you. I'm very pleased to be here. And I don't want to take any time from our panelists, so I will kick off with a presentation just to give you a general idea of this exercise. We focused on 10 countries: Guatemala, Mexico, Brazil, Barbados, Chile, Honduras, Ecuador, Colombia, and others. We interviewed their leaders. We gave them a questionnaire to find out what progress had been made in digital transformation and the challenges they were up against. And then we selected 3 institutions. And with this, case studies were done. We did more deep analyses and interviews to get a handle on their experiences and some of the challenges they faced along the way. I'm going to focus on 3 questions, and some are general considerations, elements that we wanted to take into account. And then secondly, I'll speak very briefly about the challenges that were identified as the most common amongst these institutions. And then very briefly, I will discuss the conditions that have made digital transformation possible. So I will begin with the considerations. On the supply side, it's important to bear in mind that these institutions have a primarily human focus that are very relevant for inclusion and development. Much needs to be done to fully understand them and design public policies that will truly support their efforts. Also, the socioeconomic and demographic profile they serve is an important factor in digitization, especially in some of the digital supply, to the extent that their users use digital means. Many of these institutions are providing services to semi-rural or rural population. So infrastructure is important. And then on the demand side, we're looking at, for example, bottlenecks in markets, their needs, capabilities, skills that have not been fully developed on the demand side. And this undermines people's ability to fully take advantage of financial services. In addition, it is also important that to know that there's a lack of opportunities for people to benefit from digitalization. While there are efforts and strengths in local economies, this is a factor that could prevent full development locally. So when we're talking about challenges, as I move on in my presentation, one of the main aspects identified through the questionnaires and the interviews had to do with human capital, where it's difficult to find skilled professionals, those with the capabilities needed for digitalization. And some institutions find it difficult to open up to learn more about digitalization processes in the sector through exchanges, not just exchanges with other cooperatives, but with other types of institutions and entities. We also identified a dilemma that's difficult to resolve between the social vocation of these institutions and the need they have to compete in a very dynamic and challenging sector. So when we talk about these balances that need to be struck, it's difficult to piece together rationality in their environment and incentives with the lack of these incentives so that they can develop and better serve their communities. The dilemma also lies in how to provide the services they want to provide and optimize at the same time their finances. This continues to be a challenge for so many institutions. And what have been the conditions that have been favorable for those institutions that have been able to make progress? First, there are external factors having to do with the way in which these organizations have taken on strategies and tactics, also their values and the consistency in which they adhere to those values. In terms of external factors, we look at the markets and their characteristics. Undoubtedly, this can help in digital development. It could also lead to pitfalls. Regulation is huge. I cannot emphasize that enough. It's very important to note here that there is a long road ahead to create a dialogue that's both constructive and mutually beneficial between these institutions and the regulators in terms of the scope, how it pertains to economic development. These institutions can be strategic partners. However, if there's no way to support them through an interagency, cross-sector and cross-cutting approach, it's going to be very difficult to make the most of the reach that these organizations could ultimately have. We therefore believe it's important to have constructive dialogue in light of the long-term vision in favor of growth and development. Also, many institutions that have made progress have been able to do so because they've had a vision. They've had the ability to learn, to open up, to and even expose themselves, in a manner of speaking, to their environment with the aim of developing their own capabilities in-house. This is extremely important to point out. This openness is something that we found a crucial aspect in those institutions that have been able to move forward. Much of this has to do with communication strategies that helps the organization align with the needs of digitalization. And they've been very specific in terms of their development, incorporating digitalization as a means to an end. And just in closing, I do think it's important to note that these institutions, at least the three represented here, are institutions characterized by a social approach, the human development that's very clear as part of their vision and mission. But most importantly, in my opinion, is the consistency inside the institution and projecting outward out of the institution. Again, just to wrap up, I think it's important to hear from the leaders of these institutions, hear what they have to say to us, because Latin America and the Caribbean are up against huge challenges, political challenges, including populism. So it's important to note that the social agenda is a priority, but it has to be addressed seriously and well, responsibly, with a vision, with an understanding of what's being done. And these institutions have a lot to teach us about that. So without further ado, I thank you very much for your time and for your attention. And thank you very much, Roberto. Now we're going to move on to our panel, where we will learn the firsthand experience of three financial cooperatives in the region, in Colombia, Ecuador, and Jamaica. This panel will be moderated by Terence Gallagher, Head of Financial Inclusion at IDB Invest. Thank you very much, Gabriela. Thank you very much to all of our panelists who will share the experience of their digital transformations in their institutions, as well as the barriers and obstacles they were up against in societies that seek to reduce inequality and to advance an economic development. These are pressing needs. Financial cooperatives can be partners for inclusion and economic growth. I would like to extend a welcome
the Executive Director of First Heritage Cooperative Credit Union. In Colombia, a Jorge Enrique Carvajal.
Colombia, Jorge Enrique Carvajal, Vice President of Technology and Operations of Financiera Cooperatives. In Ecuador, in Ecuador, Juan Carlos Urgiles, Manager of Cooperativa de Ahorro y Crédito.
The first question is for you. I understand that First Heritage is going through right now a change of your core banking system. Could you tell us how that is helping or making life difficult for you and the cooperative in your digitalization journey?
So hello, everyone. I'm sending you warm greetings from Jamaica, and I'm delighted and grateful to be a part of this webinar. Terence, just briefly before I specifically answer the question, let me just briefly share with the audience about FHC. FHC is the third largest credit union by asset size in Jamaica of 25 credit unions. We have an open bond of association with the members being primarily government workers, professionals, and self-employed persons. We have over 200,000 members and serve them through 11 branch locations. So yes, Terence, you're right. We are in the process of upgrading our core banking system. And this change for us is definitely seen as an enabler and a key pillar of our digitalization journey, as it will enhance our member services strategy by taking advantage of the innovative digital capabilities of this platform. While this change is essential because of the age of the legacy system, we were very deliberate in our due diligence to ensure that this new system would be able to support our digital ambitions. Our mission has always been to offer superior value to our members by providing innovative products and services. And this new core banking system will be instrumental in realizing this goal. This will not only enhance our service delivery strategy, but it also meets our vision, which is to be a world-class financial institution focused on enhancing the welfare of members, employees, and communities in which we operate. Our decisions are always supported by our member at the center mantra. We also see this platform enhancing the team member experience and providing our team with new motivation as work processes are streamlined and innovation potential increases with digital capabilities. The necessary digital skills gap analysis is underway as we prepare to implement this new core banking system. With the new system being one of the primary repositories of data containing our member interactions in the branches and other remote locations, this new tool offers modern options for interconnectivity with other specialty systems designed to enhance our member experience and other areas of the business. Another significant benefit from this investment is that significant change in the system used across the organization encourages serious considerations for business process redevelopment to bring forth efficiencies, given that the technology can now support it. So Terence, this core banking system upgrade is critical to our digitalization journey. And we anticipate the rich functionality, the scalable architecture and flexibility to keep up with the new and emerging technologies as we ready ourselves to meet the evolving challenges, to embrace the future and to serve our members well. So thank you for that question, Terence.
Great. Thank you very much, Roxanne. La próxima pregunta para Jorge. Jorge, ¿cómo trazando su giro de transformación?
Next question is for Jorge. Jorge, what was the role played by organizational culture in your process? Thank you very much for your question, Terence. I'd like to convey greetings to all of the participants who are joining us today, and I want to thank IDB Invest and the Alemana Foundation for having put this event together. Our cooperative is a savings and loan institution. We're primarily located on the east side of Colombia. At present, we have over 436,000 associates, and I'd like to indicate that we've been operating for over 60 years, and 21 years ago, we began an updating process for our services and financial products. And the idea was for us to create a new pathway that the cooperative would embark on. As part of this new pathway, we were trying to meet a very ambitious agenda because we wanted to make our cooperative a model for our country. And under this pressure of being a model, we started to engage in a certain mindset that permeated the entire organization. And it was present at every meeting, at every event, and every purpose. We wanted to be the model cooperative. And the thought process was that we were going to be the model for Colombia. And this was joined and accompanied by a philosophy that at the beginning we called best practices. Now, all of our operations are supervised by a superintendent. We have to meet the regulations that are imposed by that authority. And in addition to these best practices, we also have a permanent continuous system in place of providing oversight and engagement with other commercial banks. And we try to adapt ourselves to operations of other types to be able to continue to engage in this continuous technological development. As part of this pathway, we've shared our philosophy and our belief with many experts who say that in some way it can be risky for an institution when they invest in the education of their own people, because they can then go seek better options elsewhere. But if our cooperative does not invest in people, then the people that remain will not be the people that we want. And so for many years, 21 in fact, we've been working extensively on incentivizing and supporting studies and educational processes for all of our members and all of our employees. And we've managed to meet many of our goals. And we've set up minimal requirements, a technical degree of some sort. 60% of our people have a professional degree. And a very large portion of that 70% also have graduate degrees in different fields. Within the institution, we have a concept that we referred to in Colombia as professional growth, professional career, a professional path. And we've seen some very visible circumstances that at the level of president, coordinator, branch managers, we've seen a transition in the roles and responsibilities for all of these levels of management over the years, and they've been changing. So we've been wanting to improve this in a continuous way. And the idea is to establish interdisciplinary heterogeneous groups to be able to undertake this process. So we want to, as I stated, be the model cooperative by adopting best practices. For that purpose, we need properly trained personnel. And with our cooperative, people can see a path for growth, for professional development. And this is something that has created a very healthy degree of competition within the organization. And with this healthy competition, we can face a number of challenges, not just digital transformation, but many other projects as well. So Comultrasan at this stage has the wherewithal and strength to be able to establish itself in a more permanent way in the community as an institution that has had a firm commitment towards its own development, adopting digital transformation, improving their development, their techniques, and their offering of services and products. And as part of this effort, we've tried to strengthen our position in the sector, both at the regional and national level. This has been very visible, and this is a direct product of what you were referring to, Terrence, which was this internal culture that has developed in a very organic and very natural way. And it serves as a driving force for all of our people within the cooperative. Thank you very much, Jorge. The next question is for Rafael Carlos. What have been the key milestones for Jardín Azuayo in their process of technology projection? Thank you, Terrence. I think the most important challenge was resistance to change, and the way we overcome it is through trust, through building and garnering trust with our own people. And one of the key milestones have been relating projects, not only with the leadership of the institution, our officers, but our partners of the organization, which include more than 500,000. But if we want to talk about milestones, the first one was to develop connectivity that allows us to embark on this pathway to be able to provide and create all of these services. Secondly, the strengthening of our IT system that allowed us to make our transactional processes more effective and more rapid. Thirdly, the interconnectivity. The first milestone was connectivity. The second milestone was strengthening our processes. And the third one is creating greater engagement with non-financial and financial entities and improving our systems of payment and other operations. But more than anything, the underlying theme here is the development of trust. Trust as a trigger that will serve to overcome the resistance to change and that will also serve to motivate all of these changes that we've seen. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. Just to clarify for our audience, I'm going to do 2 more rounds of questions for the panelists, and then I'd like to open the panel so we can answer some questions from our participants. So the chat room is already working, so if you want to submit your questions, you can do so.
What are the biggest challenges that First Heritage has or had to face as it's gone through its digital journey?
Okay, thanks for that question, Terrence. I'll just share with you a few of the bigger challenges that we have faced or are facing now. The first one I would say relates to the fierce competitive pressure with a number of banks undertaking their digital transformation journey, and a few of them are fairly advanced along their pathway. And they're now directly competing with credit unions, and credit unions are now under a similar regulatory regime as banks as it pertains to know your customer requirements, the AML CFT requirements. In addition, the introduction of simplified due diligence protocols which support financial inclusion pursuits is also resulting in increased direct competition from the banks. And the regulatory regime applied to credit unions is also becoming a bigger burden as regulators are required to demonstrate the effectiveness of their oversight. Other urgent priorities relating to regulatory-driven change, like data protection readiness, command a significant and continuous resource requirement on the organization. In addition, there's a limit to the internal expertise and the number of issues management can focus on at any given time. And in many cases, the regulatory issues take priority and the business change initiatives become backlogged. Another issue we see is where our younger customers, and these are the ones we want to attract and retain, They're becoming less loyal to the movement and are also more desirous of digital offerings. So we have to be accelerating our pursuits in this regard to remain attractive and to become even more attractive to this demographic. Another challenge around the digital transformation that we have been facing relates to just the significance of the financial investment. The digital transformation is very costly, and there is the conflict of meeting short-term business targets with organizational needs for the longer-term transformation. Therefore, we have to be working through the appropriate frameworks to incentivize the right behaviors necessary for transformation. In addition, digital transformation in itself will create increased risks, for example, just cybersecurity, which requires investment to ensure adequate IT infrastructure. But notwithstanding the pandemic, the need for digital transformation is an urgent one. We also have challenges as it relates to skills in the marketplace and the new skills needed for this journey. We realize that at this point, there is some shortage in our marketplace. And so that in itself creates a challenge. So while there are these challenges, Terence, with digital transformation, both from an external and an internal perspective, what is clear to us here at FHC is that the digital transformation is no longer a nice to have, but is a critical enabler of our financial institution, our credit union's strategy. And as such, all efforts will have to be taken to ensure that the appropriate strategy is in place. Thanks, Terence.
Thanks a lot, Rosanne. Jorge, ¿qué rol tienen las alianzas?
Jorge, what role do partnerships and alliances with third parties have to support the digital transformation, and what issues need to be taken into account to achieve them? Thank you, Terence. My idea of partnerships and alliances is something that I see in different ways. I think that for me, partnerships and alliances for me have to do with consultants or universities that can support cooperatives to really understand the concept of digital transformation. And they can support us in our efforts to embark on this roadmap and this pathway so that financial cooperatives can really understand what their maturity stage really is in terms of the digital transformation arena. And they need to do so in a realistic way. Many times, people or institutions that engage in this type of effort get a false sense of progress. And in many cases, third parties such as universities and consultants can make us see that many of the systems that we've used for decades are just not sufficient to meet the needs that we have in the present. So we need to engage with these other actors to be able to establish a reliable platform that will meet our needs. The second form of partnership has to do with software providers or service providers, fintechs, network services providers, all of whom at the end of the day are entities that can help us develop, create, and establish the roadmap that each institution requires to achieve its purpose. I think that the exclusive use of technology is not sufficient. Many times you have certain institutions that have relationships with only one other company, and this makes these companies, at the end of the day, the owner of the technological development for the cooperative. And my personal view is that that shouldn't be the case. So financial cooperatives need to be able to partner up with multiple entities that can offer a broad spectrum of services. the strategies, the requirements, and the demands that digital platforms require, especially when we talk about what the expectations are from our customers, is something that we need to be able to fulfill to its maximum point. And that's why we need to be able to adopt ourselves to different software packets, different types of technology, and we need to be able to face these risks and these challenges. Secondly, partnerships also have to do with our traditional partners, other cooperatives, other entities that engage in the same business that we do. And it's important for us to establish these connections in such a way that cooperatives can present a unified front as a vast network that can offer a very broad portfolio of services and products. And this allows us to have both a digital and physical presence. We need advanced technology from the digital standpoint, but it will always just be a single element, and it can be easily something that can lead to isolation. We cannot isolate ourselves. We need to avail ourselves of different mechanisms. So the various cooperatives need to work with each other to move forward, and these partnerships are absolutely key. They're necessary. And we need to be able to work together to traverse this vast space that we know as the digital world. Thank you very much, Jorge. Well, we certainly can end monogamous relationships by engaging in polygamous relationships with other institutions. So it's interesting that I'd like to now ask our colleague what you're looking to do in this digital transformation process. Well, thank you, Terrence. We're looking at 3 different pathways.
I think there are high costs there. So you have to, the costs are very high, but the presence of educational institutions, higher education in our context, and training in universities for technical specialists, local human resource talent helps a great deal, because either you purchase the technology or you develop the technology with these young people who are studying in universities. The link with the think tanks from local universities was key, and also our approach to innovation. But I want to emphasize that this was social innovation. So you see that technology that comes externally is not easy to adapt necessarily to the local context. So if you talk about a marriage, polygamy is an alternative. However, the way polygamy relationship is governed is very complex. I'm not talking about the individuals, I'm talking about technological polygamy, because there's a lot of competition and there are mechanisms for closing that polygamous technological circle. So how do I govern the technology? And there, sometimes I will just wink at the other, but under my own rules, under my own regulations. I hope I've been clear using this analogy of polygamy, but thank you very much. Oh, thank you, Juan Carlos.
I'm not going to ask for your opinion on polygamy. Could we talk a little bit about the last year? How has the pandemic affected the implementation of your digital journey? Where do you see yourselves going from here?
All right. Well, thanks, Terrence, and I'm happy I am, being spared that opinion. But for us at FHC, the pandemic has definitely accelerated the pace of digital implementation in some areas. It has forced us to look for digital solutions so that the organization could continue to function serving and interacting with our members and enabling our team members to access remote work as necessary. The lack of ability to gather in groups required us to find new ways for team members to communicate and collaborate and complete work while not being physically in the same space. Currently, we have about 40% of our team member population engaging in some degree of remote work. At the same time, some members and prospective members expressed their interest in receiving services with little to no contact, calling for remote or at least contact limited operations. The experience of the pandemic has also shown us that the operations did not have to work perfectly before adopting digital technologies, and this significantly sped up the implementation of solutions to serve our members and enable our team members. So we have had to respond quickly with solutions to meet the new demands and at a pace that we have never contemplated before or prior to the pandemic. With the increased digital adoption, we had to also increase our budgetary allocations for infrastructure spend to bolster our information security, procure technology equipment, and train team members on cybersecurity risks. There's also the focus on quickly identifying any critical gaps in technology that has been exposed by the pandemic, and for us to move towards planning to close these gaps. So while management has always been keen on enhancing our digital capabilities prior to the pandemic, what we have found is that this experience of the pandemic, which has really caused a proliferation of digital use and digital focus, it has catalyzed the alignment and the commitment from key stakeholders. I think the pandemic has stripped away many of the barriers innate to realizing digital ambition, some of those being just the risk aversion and just having the continued alignment with many groups. And as such, with the renewed alignment and leadership and organizational support for the need for digital transformation as a means to improve our member experience, our team member experience, and the operational resilience, we'll be spending more time refining our digital transformation strategy and roadmap. So Terence, there is no doubt that the COVID-19 outbreak has caused significant progress in our digital transformation agenda. However, I think there's much more work for us, much more work to be done, and we have to step back to see the full effects of the changes we have made and to ensure that there's alignment with strategy and that the necessary changes to behavior and mindsets are occurring to support a sustainable transformation. And there are several considerations to be contemplated beyond the immediate crisis response. And so we'll be working to ensure that our strategy is adequately aligned and that we're able to meet the objectives of this strategy and to ensure the appropriate ROI for the credit union. Thanks, Terence.
Thanks a lot, Roxanne. Pasando para Jorge, mirando el futuro.
Thank you, Roxanne. Jorge, looking forward, what should financial cooperative market take into account in terms of digitalization? Thank you, Terence. In Colombia, in 2019, through FECOFIN, which is an association of credit unions and financial cooperatives, we circulated a survey to 63 cooperatives that form this federation. From a data standpoint, I wanted to tell you about the outcomes, and it was a 97% level of reliability. We looked at 189 entities. Several are cooperatives, some are financial institutions. A cooperative bank, a credit union, and another commercial finance situation. It was a 95% confidence rate. And they were talking about the true status quo of the technological situation in the entire financial cooperative sector in Colombia. First, it was a broad survey. This is a document that we can look at again and again. And I think it's a very significant source of data that will shed light on the current situation. But the important thing was to respond to the survey for our company. We found out that some of our cooperatives here in Colombia in-house in their teams, they had nobody they could go to respond to this very survey. And that was interesting because it helped us to see true levels of maturity as far as the technology they were using is concerned. We started to delve into different aspects. We were looking at technological leadership, infrastructure, communications, software, continuity plans, security, a strategic use of technology, etc. Then we looked at some of the generic infrastructure, some of the equipment and software they were using. We saw that that was reasonably stable at the business level. It was acceptable. So that was a positive discovery, but we saw difficulties when it came to security, with strategic planning, with continuity of the business. These institutions have to generate trust, not just for members, but also for the regulators. What we've discovered is that in some of the exercises in the financial sectors, at least in Colombia, the entities should invest between 5 to 10% of their income, not their profits, annual revenues, to be able to maintain technological levels that are consistent with the needs of the market. And here I would say that entities' investment levels fall far below what the expected rate would be. Based on the surveys we conducted, we saw confusion when it came to nomenclature and terms, what digital transformation actually means, technology, what it means to have products, what it means to not have products. Therefore, the proposal we were putting forward was that we have to seek out support. We have to seek out help. We have to go to universities. We need consultants. We need to enter into partnerships that will help us to understand the path we need to take. All cooperatives can do this. They are all part of a huge ecosystem that plays an important role in the networks in these countries, and in our case, in Colombia's network. It was also very clear that when you want to work aggressively in a technological ecosystem and the matter at hand, digital transformation, there has to be ownership taken within an institution as far as the digital transformation or progress, whether it's developing a product, proposing different options. I think we need to sound an alarm based on the current status. We need to emphasize the importance of investment. Something else very important is that through these federations and associations and credit unions, we have to ensure that the supervisors are legislating the entire universe. We've seen major gaps between traditional banking's abilities and credit unions or financial cooperatives. So those are the general recommendations that I could make based on our experience. Thank you very much, Jorge. Juan Carlos, the last question goes to you before we open up to audience questions. What incentives or procedures do your members manage to improve the value proposition beyond digital development? There are two groups of incentives. The first have been mentioned by my colleagues. The education system, technology, and digital evolution begin with individuals and end with individuals. So if we are not having a human-centered management, it's not going to work. So this has to be with our members, with our teams, and with management. So we have to have education systems that will help bring technology to people, bring it closer to people. This change in mindset and the level of trust that will help break through barriers and lead to transformation. If you want digital transformation, you have to begin with people, because if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to move forward. Then we have to have some social incentives having to do with the exercise that is not institution-centered, but rather user-centered. Users should have incentives to use it. So we've been asked, are you measuring how the institution is benefiting from this? I think in the digital environment, we're gaining in terms of our future, because if not, we would be endangered as a species, quote unquote. You have looking at the profitability, I think it's too early to look at that. First, we have to work on people so that we can evolve looking forward. That also comes into play when you're designing products and services based on these new technologies. So thank you. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. I'm now going to open up to audience questions. I will try to group them into subject matters. We've seen some common threads: culture, reputation. I will address these to different members of the panel, but let's begin with Roberto. When we began with the study, we were a bit concerned that financial cooperatives were lagging behind in their investments or on their digital paths. How do you see the segment now? Do you see resistance? Do you see the desire to move forward with these investments? What's your opinion? Thank you, Terence. Thank you very much to IDB Invest, particular to Maricela, for your support, the cooperative credit unions, and to FH, all of you. Many are very committed, and we've seen examples amongst our panelists today, but there are many others that are very concerned. But what is most striking is that besides being afraid, they don't have a clear vision, and they are not prepared to assume responsibility for their own digital transformations and what that entails. And that is concerning. There are two important messages I think we can draw from that. There's a lot of support out there, but it's not just about accepting help and wanting help. It's about committing to the transformation. It's very important to understand what Juan Carlos was saying. We have to win the future. Those who are reluctant and say, we've done it for this way for so long, our users don't use technology, why should we change? What we have to do is give them a hand, meet them where they are in the process. And I think there's still very many who find themselves in that situation. Thank you. Thank you, Roberto. I was going to address the questions to all of you specifically, but this next question is so important we saw several questions about this. Culture. One of the important findings of Roberto's study was that banks look at digital transformation as an opportunity to improve efficiency and productivity, while cooperatives or credit unions, since everything is member-centered, digital transformation is an opportunity to better serve the members. How do you look at this? We've heard a little bit about resistance, about fears. We got a question about how important the person-to-person relationship is in credit unions and cooperatives. Is there a risk of losing that if you do a digital transformation? Could you all refer to that? We will continue in our previous order. Roxanne?
Important the member is, how it's central to everything. Do you find resistance to the transformation, or do you find ways to bring people on board? How has it been for you?
Okay, well, thanks for that question, Terence. I think for us, there are multiple objectives with our digital transformation strategy and ambitions. And for us here at FHC and credit unions in Jamaica, we are on the cusp of being regulated by the Bank of Jamaica, which is the regulator that also regulates the commercial banks. And so we can't lose sight of just the financial prudence that we'll also have to ensure as we pursue this journey. But absolutely, there's no doubt that for us, we see the digital transformation journey as a means to really just improve the experience for our members. And so that will be one of our primary objectives as we pursue this journey. And there's the commitment to continue to be accessible to our members, to provide innovative products and services. We're also cognizant that there are going to be some member groups that either don't have the capacity or the appetite for digital offerings. And with the average age of members here in our credit union movement being, closer to 50 years old, we can see why there's sometimes that hesitancy for digital adoption. And so as we pursue our journey, we have to take this into consideration to see how we're going to deal with this group of members who are going to be likely slower to adapt to the changes. What we also realize is that in our island, our country here in Jamaica, the current infrastructure, the current, technological infrastructure has its own challenges. And we have seen just how disruptive it has been in different areas as we have had to deal with the pandemic. And so that will also have to be taken into consideration as we move along this journey for digital adoption.
Great, thank you, Roxanne. How about you, Jorge? Perdón, retornando a español. ¿Cómo tú ves la cuestión de cultura? Sus membros.
How do you see the issue of culture? Are your members embracing these changes, or are you seeing a lot of resistance? Are you concerned about any adverse impacts in the cooperative's culture? I think that the word transformation, Terence, for me, means or implies a process. I think that it should not be unnecessarily abrupt, because in our case, we've been doing business for 60 years. We have a number of physical aspects that we undertake, and some products that many times led to excellent results. And it wasn't actually done under the concept of digital transformation. So we can't just throw everything that you've built over time overboard. And now that we're trying to engage in this digital transformation, you cannot discard that which you have developed in the past as something that lacks value. I personally have a different view with regard to digital transformation. I don't necessarily agree with this, but we all associate digital transformation with young people. But when we look at these institutions, at least in our case, the people that make the investments, that take out the loans, and they have and that have this philosophy of savings are not necessarily a part of these younger generations. So what does an entity do when it talks about introducing in an aggressive way as part of a digital transformation process? You know, subliminally, they might be thinking that they're trying to conquer the young demographic. And where are these people? You know, a lot of these people are 30 years of age or younger. And I think that cooperatives need to be very careful in their approach, and they need to be very delicate to ensure that all the potential types of customers have some space within the institution. I think that many times cooperatives, at the end of the day, with this mixture of financial services and, you know, one of the things that happened is that the commercial banks started working in different markets and really impacting cooperatives, and we ended up looking at what they're doing, and we also looked at their technological practices. Now, we cannot deny that the investment capacity for a large bank is a huge advantage for them, but our success is based on the fact that we are looking for digital transformation, not to imitate the larger banks, not to imitate the same product portfolio. Clearly, there's going to be some similar traits, but we're trying to forge our own path. And this gets us back to digital transformation. What we want to do is digitally transform what we already have, not to adopt what somebody else has. And so we're trying to engage in this to move forward towards a development of digital visibility, but we want to conserve the institutional DNA. And I don't think this is an impossible task. Thank you very much, Jorge. Juan Carlos, I loved your comment that transformation is almost an existential issue for any cooperative. You either change or you have no future. But how is your culture reacting to this? Are they fearful that there will be adverse impacts, that all these changes are going to change the institution? Well, just to answer, there's a movie about a cooperative in Brooklyn, in New York, and it's a cooperative that offers services. And as part of the plot in the movie, the key is to maintain a link. If a cooperative does not preserve that link, that relationship with its members, it dies. But when they find that link and they adopt these new technologies based on that link, this could serve as the trigger for a great transformation. Now, how do you build this future? How do you elevate this link in the future and connect it? I think that the key is the organizational educational system. In Jardín Azuayo, in recent years, in the last year and a half, we've fostered the creation of a higher education commission that delves directly into the training, not only of our employees, but also older members, so that they can learn more about this transformation. And so this is how we build trust. This is how we engender trust. It's not so much a marketing issue, as Jorge mentioned. It's an issue of change in the imaginations of people that we can address in an effective way through the communication process. So the work that we've had with Roberto or with Sparkacenti to manage the creation of these issues or these elements and establishing these relationships, these links that previously used to be in-person personal links. And now we are moving toward a framework where we have digital links. And what is the bridge between one world and the other? It's the educational system that allows us to transform not only the systems, but the people as well. So as part of this environment, I would invite cooperatives to begin or start any kind of internal educational framework, and to not just focus on their balance sheet, but rather they can begin to support change, because they're not going to be able to manage change, because teleworking may affect and impact the fabric of the workflow. So what we need to do is build a new common language, establish a new social fabric, so that regardless of whether the relationships, personal relationships, are physical or virtual. Thank you, Juan Carlos. I think we have time for one more round of questions. I'd like to touch upon a number of subjects, and I'd like to talk a bit about the environment, and I'd like to talk about the existing infrastructure in your countries, electronic payment systems, regulatory frameworks, whether they are facilitating or making your efforts more complicated. Roberto, can you talk a little bit about this? Is digital infrastructure in each country important? Do cooperatives have access to that infrastructure? Yes, thank you, Terrence. I think that in order to have access to these spaces with a special focus on the cooperatives, which work extensively with rural populations and others, when we talk about the associated costs related to access to technology and the strategic issues that stem from that, that Juan Carlos mentioned, this is all geared toward the issue of digital capacity. And that's why it's very important to establish strategic relationships with other cooperatives. From the regulatory side, I think that there's no doubt that there is a huge challenge before us, as it was mentioned previously, for those who are policymakers uh, that need to understand what we do, and they need to not lose sight of what we do and create something that is segmented or fragmented. We need to look at this from a more comprehensive way, and in such a way that will allow these institutions to have the support that they need. Until they do that, any progress will be more difficult. In addition to the fact that technology can help overcome some of these difficulties. And I think it's really a matter of just trying to uh, embrace this situation and adopt it in a very constructive way.
Important, how you're on the cusp of being regulated like the banks. How do you feel the regulation and the rest of the infrastructure around digital payments, digital services in Jamaica? Is it helping or hindering your digital journey?
Well, as it relates to the regulatory environment, I think you know, in general, the regulations that relate to, you know, just onboarding new clients, you know, which would be primarily the anti-money laundering legislations and stuff. There has been efforts to simplify this process. And, you know, as mentioned earlier, you know, there are protocols around simplified due diligence, which will aid the financial inclusion efforts, and will also help to support how we are able to better serve some of the underserved communities, which we intend to be able to do through, you know, our enhanced technology. So for sure, I think the efforts of our local regulator here are more progressive as it relates to just digital pursuits of our marketplace. You know, we have larger players in our financial services space who are maybe somewhat more advanced than the credit unions are. And I think that is beneficial to the overall ecosystem. The regulator also has a regulatory sandbox, which, you know, helps to promote innovation in the digital space. There's an established digital payments platform that exists, or an established payments platform that exists here in Jamaica. So I think with those developments and the openness and inclusiveness that we're seeing in our space, while there will be an increased burden from a regulatory perspective, just to ensure, the soundness and stability of the deposit-taking institutions, I think there is an accommodative and a progressive kind of environment for us as we pursue the digital ambitions here in Jamaica.
Thanks a lot, Roxanne. Pasando a Jorge.
Thank you, Roxanne. Moving on to Jorge. What do you think about regulation frameworks and infrastructure in Colombia? Is it easier or is it harder for your efforts in Colombia? Thank you, Terrence. I think that many times it can be complicated to try to address the different issues that you mentioned with your question. I'd like to just say that in Comultrasan, we have external commercial or business advisors, and they visit different urban and rural locations. And in basic terms, they carry Financiera Comultrasan under their arm. And in this way, we feel like we're not losing this face-to-face relationship, especially in populations that don't have access to digital means. In Colombia, as I understand it, there's been a huge struggle to improve access to the internet for the entire population. And we believe that by and large, this could be very helpful. But we also have different systems such as ATM networks, a number of fintechs with whom we have relationships and other agencies, and all of this makes the work of cooperatives more and more relevant. I think that cooperatives at some point in time need to take a look at their internal structure, perhaps the board of directors in terms of their meetings, sometimes make decisions that in Colombia we consider to be very complex and often burdensome. And so I think that we need to be a little bit more practical and focus our decision making on the easier road. And in terms of the future, it looks very interesting, but in order to look at the future, we need to be mindful of the present. We can certainly do things in a way that allows us to change the word future and do so subconsciously. And we tend to say, we can do this later, but then we end up not doing it. So we need to always keep the future in mind, but always mindful of the present as well. Opportunities abound. And I think that from the technological and technical capacity standpoint in Colombia, I think that cooperatives, as I mentioned previously, could look for many partners and allies that could support our efforts in embarking along this digital transformation road. Clearly, there are other aspects that play a key role, and in Financiera Comultrasan, through the federal government, has sought mechanisms that will allow us to have a more equitable criteria so that we can perhaps have a ticket to be able to proceed freely with what we want to do. Now, there are a number of objectives, and we're talking about cooperatives that need to recognize their membership, and this recognition is very broad. And when we talk about digital platforms, we need to be able to respond to digital clients, and these typically involve people who want a quick response. They don't want to, quote, waste any time. So comparing an entity that asks you for an IP and a name, and that allows you to join the entity compared to another entity that requires a very long, complicated list of information and data, well, then the decision for the user is very clear. So this is something that I think serves or puts cooperatives in a disadvantage And we need to be able to address these digital technology issues in the appropriate way. This is, of course, challenging not only for cooperatives, but for the federal government and other service providers. So collectively, we need to be able to drive forward a process that will allow us to ensure that we can achieve this reality of offering these services in the digital space. Thank you, Jorge. We're short on time, but I want to ask Juan Carlos about your vision related to infrastructure and your existing regulatory framework. Are they helping or hindering your efforts? Well, I want to go back to what Jorge was saying. What do we prefer? A number so that they can consume, or a human being so that we can build? I think that the second choice, though it may be more difficult, offers the most promise. Another thing that we have in Ecuador is that the payment system doesn't really work. It hasn't really evolved. And the way to access these new technologies is intimately associated with the standardized payment systems, because the cost systems, or rather, instead of cost or price systems, these are a fundamental roadblock. If we talk about what we had, which was working, the income systems or payment systems generate a lot of profitability. So why? Because it's more economical, more efficient, more secure, and it has scaling performance that is more clear. And that's the hardest thing here in our country, especially here in Ecuador. These roadblocks, the obstacles are created by the existing cost systems. So getting rid of those after investing so much money into them and adopting other technologies is really something that I don't think is very feasible. Thank you, Juan Carlos. Very well, we've run out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists because we've had a wonderful, very fruitful conversation. I want to thank them all for discussing such fascinating topics. Now I'm going to yield the floor to my colleague, Gabriela. Thank you, Terry. And once again, I'd like to thank all our panelists for sharing their experiences. I just wanted to emphasize three key points. Despite the differences both for commercial banks as well as financial cooperatives, digitalization is garnering more and more importance to be relevant in different emerging markets. The transformation geared towards clients and processes is crucial to ensure competitiveness for cooperatives. It was stated very clearly. The social focus is one of the key value added processes that cooperatives offer. And this also requires that we incentivize employees and staff to be able to maintain that culture. So the most advanced cooperatives in the digital space have the social relationship and the human being at the forefront of everything they do. As we all know, technology is not a one single solution. It's just a tool that allows organizations to address the needs of their clients in a more effective and agile way, and it also helps them meet their market demands. Now, much of this relies on the different factors that affects these cooperatives, and finding partners is very key and strategic. And so making financial resources more available will ensure the growth for cooperatives. Nevertheless, the financial support needs to be sufficiently flexible and has to have the appropriate design so that cooperatives can capitalize them to the extent possible. And sometimes resorting to outside help or experts, it's important for us to do so for us to achieve our means. At the IDB, we are firmly committed to supporting these networks and in particular cooperatives in the region in all of their endeavors. With that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Have a wonderful day.